Hey everybody, this is your this is your host Sejohn Sarowick for the Say Report, coming to you with his host companion Devon D. Decker.
He thinks he's so rich and so Scottish.
Oh God! All right, so we're just gonna redo the
No, we're not
conversation
going to
that we
do
just had.
redo the conversation.
I've been told that I need to warn you that this is in fact a time capsule episode. We need to make sure that that is laid out. This is being recorded at an earlier date. Was I not supposed to reveal that?
No, it was fun. I was trying to do like stingers. Reveal.
Oh, okay, there you go. I thought I was being yelled at. There's
No,
a lot
why
of
would
yelling
we
that
yell?
goes on off mic, so everybody should know that. No, and we're here to talk to you today about a very important topic that's very close to my heart. Stumble upon is dead.
Oh, really? It's not stumbled upon?
Yeah, look. First, there's only one thing to say about the death of Stumble Upon. You ruined it, internet. You took a good thing, you inserted a bunch of porn into it, and it just died. Congratulations. But anyway, that's what you do with everything. So, moving on.
Well, can I tell you something though? I thought stumble upon was dead long ago. You
Yeah.
sent me that like literally I could feel the tears through my phone text that stumble upon has died, and I'm like, dude, that died like 17 years ago. It started, it got porned up, and then it ended.
Yeah, no. Essentially, that's exactly what happened. It was such a good thing in concept, and then the internet did what the internet does with it and killed it. So you're right; it's been dead for a while. But do not fret; it will still work for a bit. It's just they're not gonna support it in any way. So once your phone updates, you won't be able to download the app anymore and all that nonsense. But until then,
It had an app.
you can stumble to your own porn's content. Yeah. Oh yeah, man. You could set the whole thing up. You could find all the porn you wanted on it.
Hey, how else am I
Really,
supposed to know what I might be into? I'm
yeah,
not just
look,
gonna randomly type in words into Google and hope there's porn.
I just can't believe like how much we ruined the potential of this thing. Like it was such a great idea and concept. Like you could just put in like, hey, I want to look up drink recipes, and then just like for an hour, just like hit the button and just new drink recipes in front of your face, or like, hey, I want to learn how to do this artistic thing, and you get all these tutorial videos. But nope, we decided to turn around and just put a bunch of dicks into it. But yeah, no, that's not what we're here to talk about today, though.
Double time capsule.
No, man. I had in the same night also tweeted you to be like, we should do an episode about America's Sweethearts, the 2001 romantic comedy that is honestly probably one of my top 10 romantic comedies. I won't say top movies of all time, but I will give it in the top 10 romantic comedies of all time for sure. It makes that list. Did you end up getting to watch it
Oh yeah, I
before
watched
this?
it, and I tried to track down the unrated edition, like huge air quotes that you can't see. I
Yeah,
can't stop.
I isn't it just like 10 more minutes of John Cusack's like masturbation jokes or something? Like it's nothing more. It's
No,
nothing
it's
big.
actually there's a lot. Well, because so the unrated edition, why huge air quotes around it, is just the non-American release. It's the international release.
Ah, okay,
Um,
okay, okay.
And what it is it actually does a lot to ruin parts of the movie. Spoilers
Okay.
for American Sweethearts, and
Yeah,
also
we should give like a quick rundown of what the concept of this movie is because I doubt everybody that's listening has ever seen this movie. But you should is going to be my big thing about it.
first of all, I got to pay kudos to Sejohn for picking a time capsule topic that like won't go bad in a month. Alex Incorporated was a mistake. I take full responsibility for that. But also, it's interesting to do America's Sweethearts because it's a time capsule itself.
Oh yeah,
Because
for sure.
movies and how movies are marketed, at that time period, 2001, it's also like I don't want to bring everything down here, but like it releases 2 months before September 11th happens.
Hmm.
So it's
Yes.
also a really like look like a huge microcosm of what the world was like pre September 11th.
Yeah, for sure. And then the other big thing about it that I wanted to bring to the Say report is that we joke a lot about the idea of like meta being part of the conversation now, and like it's just everything is just meta nowadays. And this is a movie that was meta before meta was big. Not to say that it was like the progenitor for sure. Like I don't want to give it that title at all, but it uses the idea of like the like heady joke in a way that like nothing at its time was doing really. And so it ends up being kind of a really kind of important film in that aspect. But we talked about that a lot in the last couple of weeks on this on the show. So I wanted to bring something to the table that, like you said, wasn't going to go bad in a month, but also was something that fit in with a lot of what we've been talking about. And on top of that, it's also something that I enjoy and want people to go and see. So yeah, there's all that wrapped up all in it.
And at
But
the
yeah,
time of this recording, it's on Netflix.
yeah.
So there's a good chance it'll still be on Netflix whenever we release this.
hmm So America's Sweethearts is the beautiful story of two lovely kids, Catherine Zeta-Jones and John Cusack, who are in a wonderful relationship. It turns out that it's all basically just a shallow Hollywood relationship. It falls apart, and now it is a romantic comedy. So in it, John Cusack finds true love in another character. We will get into all of the story in a bit, but essentially, like, the big thing about it is it's a movie about making movies and what it's like to sell a movie based on just two actors. Which happened a lot in the 90s and early 2000s, and I think still kind of happens today, right? Like, I don't know. We don't really have the Tom Hanks, Meg Ryan comedy anymore, do we? Like, who's the team up for that?
Well, you say that, and Winona Ryder and Keanu Reeves have a movie coming out in August, and all I can think of is the movie that they were in together, A Walk in the Clouds, maybe. It's one of those.
I don't know.
It's one of those ones, like way back. Like,
Well, you know, the other big one that we had for a while there was oddly Adam Sandler and Drew Barrymore, right?
oh,
Like,
we can
didn't
also
they
talk
have like...
about what's her name, Goldie Hawn's daughter, and Matthew McConaughey. I wish I could think of her name. Kate Hudson.
I mean, I was gonna say Kate Hudson and Matthew McConaughey, or Sarah Jessica Parker and Matthew McConaughey. Didn't they have a couple of movies
They only
together
had
too?
one. Thank
Okay.
God. Thank Christ. No.
But yeah, so this isn't a rare concept, and it's not like it doesn't happen anymore, because like you pointed out, the Winona Ryder and Keanu Reeves thing, we like seeing these people come back together, right? Like, it was the reason why everybody was so excited when 6 Days, 7 Nights was coming out, right? No, not that one. That's
Not
the
that
Harrison
no
Ford
one was excited about 6 Days, 7 Nights.
Anne Heche was kind of excited about that one. She
I'm
was
going to
like,
be in a
"We're-"
movie with Han Solo. I don't know what I am today.
No, I don't know. We get excited when we see these like power couples come together.
You've
right?
Got
Like,
Mail. You've Got Mail would be the one that we should point
the
at.
prime example, right? No, for sure. So America's Sweethearts is playing off of that, the idea of how that marketing that we buy into and why we go to those movies actually is all just kind of just a big old like cynical sham, right? And on top of that, also is a really cute romantic comedy within and of itself. So I think it's really funny the way that it plays on itself. But yeah, Devin. So sorry, this is the first time you've seen this movie, right?
No. I saw this movie in theaters with
I was very
my
surprised
high
because
school
when I said I
crush.
want to see this movie, you were like, I guess I got to go see this movie now. And I
Well, because you know what, Sejohn? I am a consummate professional, and I'm not going to go off of the memories of 2001 Devon, who was really just there because he had a crush on the girl he went to the movie with.
see, I've
Like-
seen it at least once a year, every year since it came out, so I can totally just go off of memory.
Right, no. So it was like one of those things where I'm like, I need to watch it as an adult. I need to reaffirm the beliefs that I have about this film. Because, like, I want to say that wasn't the last time I saw it. It's not like I saw it in theaters that summer day, and that was it. And then I'm like, all my hopes and dreams are dead. No, I'm not a monster. I've seen it. I've definitely seen it on HBO a couple of times, but I would safely say I hadn't seen America's Sweetheart in 10 years before I sat down to watch it for this episode.
Well, you know, and just to give everybody a good round, like a good round of understanding of where this falls in the pantheon, as we say, I'm looking right now and I'm seeing that it holds a really solid 30% on Rotten Tomatoes, a really good 45% on Metacritic, and a 5.7 out of 10 on IMDb. So we're hitting one out of the park on this. But I will say this: Google users, right there with me, 76% like this movie.
Oh, this movie on Netflix, because it's on Netflix, 90% match.
Yeah,
for
yeah.
for the types of movies that I like.
And
it's
I think, I mean, like, is this a movie that got hit real bad by September 11th? Like, is that something that happened? Was this just not the kind of movie that we wanted to see suddenly in a world where that kind of shit could happen?
I wonder if this is the last romantic comedy. It's not, because in after that we had How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days and all those other
Spider-Man.
ones. Right.
Yeah,
But
no,
it's one of
right.
those things where like you almost wonder if this is one of this is probably one of the last ones to come out in that pre-September 11th world. I don't know why I
Right.
had to bring it in, but like I think about it as like it is this weird representation of like this is the most important thing in the world to all of those people at that Hyatt that weekend.
Well, and
Are
I will
these two
say,
characters?
well, yeah, for sure. Like the plot alone, is definitely a pre 9/11 plot for sure. But the big thing about it for me is the cynicism that's in it, and the idea that I wonder if it came out nowadays. And we've talked about this before. The idea that our comedies become much more cynical over the last 20 years. Like I wonder if it would play a lot better now. I wonder if it would get a lot better reviews in its initial release because of the idea that it was coming out at the end of the 90s, the early 2000s. Like you didn't see movies like this that were willing to, you know, this isn't a movie that celebrates Hollywood in any way. This is a movie that really kind of rips it apart in a lot of places. Like, I mean, all in lighthearted fun and not in any really like meaningful, long-lasting way, obviously, as we can see, because like rarely anybody talks about this movie anymore. But like, it does take a pretty hard stab at things that a lot of people tend to love, which I think is the point. I mean, I think that's the joke of the title and the whole concept, right? Is like the thing you love, yeah, it's not real. Like that's the whole like joke of the movie, right? And I don't know if 2001 America was into that sort of storyline at the time, you
Well,
know?
you know what? If I had to say what overshadowed America's Sweethearts, it's more the fact that like Catherine Zeta-Jones does
Hmm.
Chicago that same year, because Chicago
Yeah.
wins in 2002 Best Picture.
Hmm.
So like she has a movie that shows her off better.
Hmm.
If we're equating Richard Gere and Julia Roberts as another America's Sweetheart esque couple,
Hmm.
they have Runaway Bride that comes out around that same time. And then Richard Gere is also in Chicago. So that
Hmm.
pairing also kind of overshadows. And also, I'm pretty sure Ocean's 11 comes out
Comes out
too.
pretty soon in
Like
that area,
after.
yeah.
So, like, there's. And John Cusack, and I love John Cusack. This is not meant to be rude to him in any way, shape, or form. He had been on this slope of more like toxic comedies, like
Hmm.
not in any negative way, but like the comedy is being derived from cynicism and things like that. Like High Fidelity was his last movie before this, as far as like the timeline works for me.
Oh, like no joke. Like John Cusack was like the king of the dark comedy in the 90s. Right? He was one of the few dudes that could do a dark comedy and make it work, a la like Grosse Point Blank, right? Like he was one of the few people that could pull it off in that time. Which is why I'm so surprised you don't see more of him nowadays, because I feel like now is his time. Like now is the time to come back and do some shit, right? But yeah, I don't know what happened there. But yeah. Yeah, for sure. Like John Cusack was definitely doing darker and darker movies back then, for the time period.
Right.
Again, we're not looking at the we're not looking at like Logan, where with the death of Wolverine, but it's some pretty dark stuff for family fare in America's Sweethearts.
And Billy
Um,
Crystal's last film before this is Analyze This. So
right.
like, and those are the four people who are the draw to this movie.
Yeah.
So like, if I want to see a Catherine Zeta-Jones or Julia Roberts picture in 2001, there are two better regarded by like critics things that exist out there. John
Hmm.
Cusack, like that cynicism, he was really the selling point for the type of movie that America's Sweethearts is.
Right.
And like Billy Crystal, as neurotic as he is and all the fun stuff that he has in his filmography, this is not the type of movie that people were excited to see him in after Analyze This.
Sure.
It's why, like, not even 2 years later, he's doing Analyze That, a sequel that makes no sense.
No, really not at all. No, but it's funny that you mentioned that they're the top ones for this movie, and they're definitely the draw. But in retrospect, this movie has a fuck ton of people in it. I mean, like, you go down the secondary cast alone, and you've got Hank Azaria, Christopher Walken, Stanley Tucci, Alan Arkin. Like, I'm just like looking down the list here. Larry King as himself doing this phenomenal bit in which you then get Catherine Zeta-Jones just going on a rampage about how much she hates Larry King in the movie. And it's this beautiful moment of them ripping on him. And then as soon as the page walks by, they're just like, tell Larry I love him. It's just such a great joke. There's so many good moments to that. But like, yeah, like, I mean, when did The Office start up?
The Office is 2005, I believe.
So this is Rainn Wilson like 5 years before like
Yeah.
his big blowout, right? Like I mean you've got all sorts of people in this film. Yeah, I mean Seth Green trying to take his whole like I'm gonna try acting thing that he did for a while there.
Oh, don't be mean to Seth Green.
If anybody in this world can take somebody being shitty to him, it's Seth Green.
Can he, or is he gonna do like a Robot Chicken about this now?
um, hey man, just give me more Greg the Bunny and I'll be happy. Yeah, like I think that this like I think this ends up being one of those, like you said, time capsule movies in more ways than one, because you also just you end up with this like slew of just character actors that I mean this has got everybody in it, you
It
know,
also
like
has Byron Allen in it, which is the craziest thing in the world. Like 100%. I brought him up maybe like 3 episodes ago in the real timeline of this show, and I'm like, is this why Sejohn wants to watch America's Sweethearts? To be like,
maybe
Byron
that
Allen
was-
has been relevant since 2001. Byron Allen from entertainmentstudios.com. And I'm just like, oh my god, it's Byron Allen.
oh man, yeah, there's just a ton going on in this movie. But so you hadn't seen it in like 10 years. What did you think going back to it?
A lot of the stuff that you said, that like there's the people in this film are, it's crazy. Like just all these faces, and it's like these are the kind of people that it's like even like 4 years later, just if Christopher Walken was in a movie, that would be enough to go see the film.
Right.
Looking at you, Envy.
God damn it. I spent so much money to go see that movie. Anyway.
But like, and that's the thing, like, it's like, is there's all these draw character actors that are in there, and it's like, wow, this is impressive when you think about the fact that like that's not what they marketed this movie on at all.
No,
Like,
no, not at all.
So you get a lot of like, oh, nice job for you, America's Sweethearts. Like you kept them a secret. Where like nowadays, like let's just look at Jurassic World: Fallen Kingdom. Sejohn still hasn't seen it, I assume, when you're listening to it, not just during recording. They sell it on Jeff Goldblum. Like Jeff Goldblum is the whole trailer. I know I'm not wrong. Jeff Goldblum is the trailer for that movie.
Right.
Jeff Goldblum is in the first scene and the last scene of Jurassic World: Fallen Kingdom. And he doesn't do anything except sit at a table and talking to a microphone. But he's the thing that
I've always said that I would just watch him with the paper. They just decided to take me up on that bet.
no, and that's what I'm saying is like that would have been like a great moment if they'd never showed him in a trailer. It's like, holy shit, Ian Malcolm is back.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
And
of course.
Where like in this one, like the fact that Christopher Walken is the director, I don't think is ever revealed in the trailers.
No. Yeah, it's not. It's because it's not a selling point, like you said. And in fact, I think that might also be another problem that this movie had. You know, we talk about bad marketing all the time, but I mean, you want to go to the golden age of terrible marketing. Let's talk about the 90s. And I do think that this movie was also sold very much on the idea that it was a romantic comedy and not the like cynical dark comedy. And I think that that's where a lot of the fault lies too, right? In the idea that if you go into this expecting just a regular romantic comedy, of course it's not going to fill your needs, right? So like it doesn't get sold on its guest stars, it doesn't get sold on its jokes, it doesn't get sold on like the dark like underbelly of Hollywood that it's exposing. Instead it gets sold on like all these 4 main characters. I straight up, before I ever saw America's Sweethearts, I thought it was about 2 different couples, like Billy Crystal not ending, well, I was gonna say Billy Crystal not ending up with anybody, but I'm pretty sure he ends up with a dog by the end of this movie. But Billy Crystal not ending up with like Julia Roberts and John Cusack not ending up with Catherine Zeta-Jones is just like okay.
Okay, but I don't want to be rude to Sejohn, and I am voting enchantment protocol again. You misread trailers all the time. And I think it's one of my favorite things about you. Like, prevalent reasons behind our friendship is that, like, you see the trailer for America's Sweethearts, and you're like, oh, that's nice. Those 2 crazy kids are going to get together, and these 2 crazy kids are going to get together.
No, you have to remember that this is 2000 when these trailers would have been out, and Sejohn was 13 years old, 12 years old. He wasn't watching the things that America's Sweethearts would have been. All I was seeing was posters. Like that's all I
I
was seeing
got
for
you.
this movie. This movie was sold to me entirely on like John Cusack and Billy Crystal being in it, not in any like ad type of way, but just like, hey, look at that poster there with the four of them on it. Oh, it's not about a happy couple. Okay, like, and for me back then, that was a great surprise, and I love that kind of crap. But I know for a fact that there are people in this world that if they go to a movie expecting to see John Cusack and Catherine Zeta-Jones end up together, and they don't, that's a very bad movie for them.
Well, and not to be rude about what you've just said, because you bring up a very good point there, but it also is reflected in the film itself with what Hal Weidman brings forward
Oh yeah,
as
yeah.
time over time is like they're expecting this lavish Nazi love story with time travel, and he turned it into this cynical look at like what Hollywood is. And that's
Hmm.
like, and that's beautiful. Like that, the movie is like, we know that we fucking tricked you. You
Hmm.
know how we know that we fucking tricked you? We do a victory lap in our third act.
Yeah, yeah. Essentially, they were like, we didn't even have to try with the marketing. We knew they were gonna just do it. Like, we didn't bother with the marketing because they were just gonna fuck it up anyway. And like, that's part of the joke, guys. like it's harsh. It is a real harsh like dose of reality in that film that is just like so good. It's just so good. Yeah, so like I'm just more surprised that more and more people aren't like picking up on this film. You know, and like I said at the beginning, like it's not that I feel like this is a fantastically made film, and I think that like the fact that people aren't talking about it, there's reasons. You know, there's some stuff that happens in this movie that are really like weird, and I don't know. Part of me can't figure out where the joke ends sometimes, you know? Like I think that's one of the problems that this movie has is like when at what point do they want us to take it seriously as like a relationship between Julia Roberts and John Cusack? At what point do we want to understand that Catherine Zeta-Jones is not being a bitch? Like, I mean, outright. Like, there's no other way to put it. Like, she's just terrible throughout this whole movie. And then at some point, there's a turn for her where she's not so terrible, but she's still pretty terrible. There's never a moment where she's okay. You
Well,
know what
yeah,
I
well,
mean?
you talk about that turn where she's not so terrible. That's just her trying to get people to like her again. That's
Yeah.
not even a real turn. Like
Right.
so if anything, that turn where like you're sort of supposed to be rooting for her as a character,
Hmm.
is the
Hmm.
worst that she is in the film because it's
Yeah.
total
Yes.
manifest in like this way to like, I mean, she is. Here's where the joke ends for me, and it's not because, and it's not because they want it to. It's just like, holy fuck, what a bad joke. Holy fuck, like what a joke of the time. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
everything
Yeah.
else in this movie is like, it's really timeless in a lot of ways, except for like the idea of the press
Yeah.
junket, because I feel like those are total dinosaurs in the modern world. I
You're
can't
right.
imagine that press junkets still happen in a world where
I
Skype
mean,
exists.
no, you know what it is press junkets don't happen in a world in which Comic-Con exists. Like that's what this is
Yeah.
now. Is they wouldn't go out to the middle of nowhere for this thing. They would get dragged to a big city with a big event already planned that they got shoehorned into.
Yeah. Well, that they shoehorned themselves into.
That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not like Comic Con's like, hey, guess what? You're coming to us.
No, but
Okay.
wouldn't that be the exact setting this time around, right?
Yeah, you're not wrong. Like,
even
it'd
though
be
it's a romantic comedy and has nothing to do with comics in any way, they would totally end up at like
well, that's the big
CCS.
issue. That's the biggest issue of
Right?
Comic Con now is
Right.
that like it's more about films. It's less about the comics, and it's more about other forms of media.
Oh, God.
The Cleveland show did a great job about that.
America's Sweethearts 2, we gotta do this. We gots to do this.
I would be all about it, but I like but it's an anthology sequel. Like, don't expect to see anybody again. Maybe Lee.
Oh no! This time around though, yes. No, you gotta bring Seth Green back. You gotta bring Danny back.
Okay, I'm okay with that. I'm fine with that too.
No, this time around it would totally be Emma Stone and Ryan Gosling, right?
Love
like
it.
that's
They've
that
done
would be
3
the
movies together too. There's our modern America's sweethearts.
right. But that's perfect, right? As the two of them coming together to play two people that hate each other would be fantastic. But the twist this time is they do end up back together. See?
Ooh. I guess so. I mean, I guess that's because it's subverting expectations. But that means that you can't make either of them too unlikable. Because that's like the other problem that they go, oh, first of all, where the joke ends in America's Sweethearts is
yeah, sorry.
they're calling it the Blair Bitch Project. Like, I don't care what blockers you have on. I don't care how into the movie you are. That joke pulls you out of it. And
Yes.
thank Christ, like it almost feels like it was manufactured to be that way because there's literally a minute of movie left after that line. Like it's like we gotta remind people that like the real world exists.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Because that joke,
I think the big one for me is I think the big moment for me is that there's no moment. It's so weird because John Cusack is so charming and it's so hard for me to ever really truly hate him in a role, and so like I don't at all in this movie, and I think they go out of their way to really kind of redeem him in a lot of ways. But there's never a clear moment when he looks at Julia Roberts and is just like, I've always kind of liked you. You get that, right? Like that doesn't happen, and that sucks because that means that the entire point of this movie is that she lost some weight and suddenly she's attractive, right? Which is like the worst kind of dinosaur of a trope ever.
Well, to be fair, he does kiss her before she loses the weight. He's
That's true.
Drunk,
there is that moment,
and he doesn't remember it.
which is well, right? Yeah.
Which are other
let's set up
tropes.
all of the context for this, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, like I said, like for a movie that was made in the 90s, early 2000s, you know, and came out 2001, like it definitely was a lot more forward thinking than anything else coming out that time. But I think, you know, like all progressive movements, we've come around to it eating itself, and it's no longer progressive. There's a lot of really problematic stuff in it. You know, the weight loss stuff, the Hank Azaria's character,
right? Which
entire
can we do we want to like dedicate an entire section of that, or is this where we want to like delve into the fact that like Hank Azaria always problematic?
Yeah, I don't think there's a way around that anymore. You know, I mean, like people I mean, what was the name of the documentary that just came out? Let's Talk About a Poo or something like that, or
Much a Poo About Nothing. No, that's actually an episode of The Simpsons. No, there was a documentary about the character of Apu and how he is a negative stereotype, and you know, like Indian actors go out and they're like, "Hey, can you do Apu for me?" So it's like that's like not. That's not even a stereotype anymore. It's what people expect. Like it's further ingrained than a stereotype.
Yeah. And we should just quickly take a second to point out that Hank Azaria has come out and talked about the idea that he would be very fine with the idea of retiring the character. But I mean, at the same time, I have not heard about him making any strong movements in one way or the other. You know, who knows what kind of sway he has. I mean, the thing is that he is so integral to The Simpsons, I bet he has some sway. But anyway, he has come out and said that he would gladly retire the character if that was the way that the show decided to go with it, and we'll see what happens there.
Was also that episode where Lisa was getting read a book by Marge, and it's like, well, people just need to understand that like our representations of people in the past were what they were, and like it doesn't change, and it's like that really felt like The Simpsons digging their heels into like, we're not getting rid of Apu. Grow up.
Yeah, for sure. No, for sure. But I want to, just make sure that we're covering all of our bases here, because Hank Azaria has come out and talked about that. But that has not yet stopped him from doing these sorts of things, for sure, though. You're right. He is one of the more problematic character actors in Hollywood. And again, this role being a perfect example of that. I have no idea what he is doing.
I had to look up if he was Spanish. Like I looked up afterwards. I'm like, is he of Latin descent, or is it just like? And it's fine. You know what? It doesn't bother me that these are the characters that he plays. Right? Like you need to find that line of like, they're an actor, so they're putting something on, and it's a comedy, so it's exaggerated. Right? Like his character's name is Hector Gorgonzolas. Like,
and is there not a joke in my head? And tell me if I'm wrong, but in my head, I have always remembered a joke at some moment of him coming out of that voice and realizing that it's been an act the entire time. And then when rewatching it, I don't remember that ever happening.
That doesn't happen. Like, there's another movie where he does that.
Okay. See, is that what it is? Is that he plays a role like this in another film, and then
at the end he comes out, he's like, this is all an act, and it's
he's also the one in the Birdcage, right, with Nathan Lane. Yeah, and it's the same problem there. He's putting on this very problematic voice, and movement that he's doing with his body the entire time is really questionable. He takes these huge swings, man. He makes some choices, and it's hard sometimes to go with him on them nowadays, but I know for a fact back then that it was fucking gold, and it's what he's made his bank on.
It's totally what he's made. I'm looking at him as the dog walker and Mad About You. Mm-hmm. Like even that is like an exaggeration of
the New York stereotype, right? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, like that's just what this dude does. So yeah, so you watch him in this movie and the entire time you're just like, what the fuck is happening here? And then the entire storyline with Julia Roberts and the idea that suddenly she's attractive after all of this time because she's lost all this weight, right? And then so as much as this movie is calling out all of these tropes left and right, it's also very much feeding into every last one of them. So it's a weird animal. Like the whole movie is just a weird animal. Yeah, man.
Yeah, it's like, and I don't. Oh. I
So
have a
like,
problem with Julia Roberts.
okay, so
I
let's
have a
get into this.
singular problem with Julia Roberts. This is as a person who on Friday night I was flipping through the channels. Well, my father was flipping through the channels, and Notting Hill was on, and he passed it, which kind of blew my mind because if Notting Hill is on, it's on our television. And I'm like, why didn't you put on Notting Hill? And he's like, I'm like, but it's at the scene. And he's like, bullshit, it's at the scene. And he goes to the channel, and it's literally at the I'm just a girl standing in front of a boy asking him to love her. And Dale was like, that was impressive. And I'm like, I live in a house with him. I've seen Notting Hill too many times. Like, I don't know if there's a line for too many times to see Notting Hill, but if there is one, I've crossed it. Like, to the point that Dale's like, have you ever seen this movie? It's like, I've seen this movie too many times. I saw it in theaters twice somehow.
Oh man.
But,
So what is where do you begin to take issue with Julia Roberts?
I take issue with Julia Roberts in, well, it's
America's only true sweetheart of this entire movie, by the way, I believe.
That's the weirdest thing is that it's called America's Sweethearts, and the actual America's Sweetheart is in like a weird side role and does a lot to, like, because the honest thing in this movie, if she wanted to be a strong character and like a good role model, is that she doesn't wind up with John Cusack.
Right.
Like, she loses all credibility as her whole, like, I'm done being your little slave, and, oh, Kiki this, Kiki that. Like that whole speech rings hollow because she winds up with a dude who basically she has a schoolgirl crush on.
Right. Yeah, no, for sure. Like I was saying, like there's all these weird little problematic things that do end up happening. But yeah,
and you're
so
supposed to be
Julia
happy about
Roberts
it. So
has
Julia Roberts
somehow jilted you, and
she hasn't jilted me, and I love her. Honestly, I love Julia Roberts. And looking back on it, I feel like she may have invented meta one day. Like, she may be the progenitor of it, because like Notting Hill is super meta. Like, that movie's super meta. This movie, real meta. And then friggin' Ocean's 12, where she plays herself. Like, or like, and then like even through her niece in like Nancy Drew, where fucking Bruce Willis shows up. Like, I don't know. I know that.
I bet you, like, somewhere along the
existed,
line, I bet if you really looked into it, she's probably got like a real fondness for like Brechtian acting or something, right? Like that's got to be what it is. Like she has some training somewhere in her that she really latched onto, and it was like German expressionism or something, where like the whole idea is to be disconnected from the audience and disconnected from the art and all that stuff. Like, she probably has some really deep-seated love of that stuff that puts her into these projects that very clearly ride these lines, because she definitely follows them. I mean, even at the end of the day, something like Pretty Women all the way back in the day, the whole joke of that movie, right, is that it's this love story between a man and a woman, but what you have is you have a prostitute, right? Like, that's the
and then
big
I was
twist.
even going to bring up the fact that, like, Runaway Bride, so much of that movie is built upon their relationship in Pretty Woman.
Yes, exactly. Yeah,
like,
no, that movie rings hollow unless you really have like a fondness for Pretty Women and them ending up together, right? Like, yeah, for sure. No, you're not wrong. Like, it's this weird like ghosting effect that she takes into everything, to the point where it ends up eating itself and she plays herself in Ocean's 12. Like, that's when it goes too far, right?
Does
like,
it go too far? So
well,
we're not even far enough.
Because now we've looked back on it and we've realized that maybe that joke's not so bad in light of things that have happened in the last like 10 years, right? No, it's a good call. Julia Roberts, the queen of meta comedy.
And that's not even the issue. Right, where issue stems from Julia Roberts is, I'm a big fan of Julia Roberts as an actress. I love her, but I watched 365 movies back in 2015, which, oh my god, I can't believe that was 3 years ago.
Yeah,
like that. I like sat and watched 370 actually at the end of the day, new movies. And what a part of that was seeing Julia Roberts movies that I had never seen. So like, I saw Mystic Pizza, and I love me some Mystic Pizza. That movie's fantastic. But I also watched Runaway Bride, where she does a lot of things in that movie that are questionable. Like the dyeing of his hair is like a real like he's just like they're real mean to him when he first comes to the town. And yes, he wrote like the article, but he didn't really use her. Did he use her name initially, or did
I
people
don't
like
remember.
just know that it was her because, well, we
I
all
think
know
it's
her.
right. Well, and I think part of it is that he might. I think that he probably didn't use her name, but that was a hollow gesture because everything else that he did pretty much gave away who it was. You know what I mean? Like I think that's more the concept of it. But again, I don't really know.
Yeah. And so he shows up and they're real mean to him in the beginning of that. So like I'm like, oh, this is kind of like it's fighting hate with hate, which I
Hmm.
do definitely have a problem with. Like
Hmm.
it's like wouldn't it be great if you were like better than him? Like, oh, thank you for writing that article. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Aren't
right.
you a dare? No, let's mess with his hair and make like his
No,
life a living
see, yeah,
hell.
you want more of a Reese Witherspoon story then. That's what you want.
Right. But the real issue from 2015 is I saw a movie that I had never seen. And that movie is My Best Friend's Wedding.
Hmm.
I don't know the last time you've seen My Best Friend's Wedding. I don't know if you've ever seen My Best Friend's Wedding.
Oh, I have. I yeah. It's
She is a super cunt in that movie. Like it is Julia Roberts at her cuntiest. And
oh man. Yeah.
And like
Okay.
I tried to like part of me was like I need to rewatch it before we do the America Sweetheart episode cuz maybe I was just cynical. Maybe I had just seen too many movies and it hit me the wrong way. I was unable to find it. So I have not rewatched it since that 2015 where like movies were my lifeblood. So I
Hmm.
don't know if maybe it was just like a bad day or that. But like her whole story of being like I'm in love with Dermot Mulrooney and I don't care that he found love. He's supposed to wind up with me. That's why we said we're 28 if we're not married, we're getting married. Not 40. I really stacked the deck in my favor here with 28.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think that one of the big things about Julia Roberts' career is the types of movies she has chosen to been in are not movies that age well at all, like at all. I mean, like let's go back to America's Sweethearts. This movie just isn't the same movie that it was. Now, you could argue that this one might be one of the few that got better, but all in all, like this is just it is very much a product of its time and doesn't work anymore, right? So like a la everything else that she seems to have done, it just does not seem to work anymore. And so one of the things with My Best Friend's Wedding is like you can't deny the fact that it fucking lit the world on fire when it came out, right? Like it was the movie that everybody was talking about when it came out, and for years afterwards. Now, I haven't heard that in the last 10 years. I don't think I've heard one person mention My Best Friend's Wedding to me other than you in the last 10 minutes, right? But when I was a kid, that was the story. That was up there with Pretty Woman. Sorry, I was like we just mentioned it. But it was up there with like the tops. And I think it's fallen out of favor, right? And I think a lot of it has to do with exactly what you're talking about. Is we've come around to realize that a lot of the stuff that are like main characters in these movies, heroes and heroines alike, have had some like really troublesome, problematic like attitudes, and that we now look back on and are just like maybe those aren't the kinds of things we want to emulate in our romantic comedies, right? Oddly enough, I think somebody that's avoided that kind of aging is actually somebody like John Cusack, who, because of his doing like cynical, kind of hard to like characters, he's always been cynical and hard to like. So now it still works because he's still kind of cynical and still kind of hard to like, right? You know what I mean? Like that doesn't go anywhere. There's nowhere to go from the bottom, I guess is what I'm saying, right? So like it's interesting to see somebody like Julia Roberts who was playing all of these lead roles that you were supposed to just love, and we did at the time. Sandra Bullock is kind of the same way. She played a bunch of these roles that you were just supposed to love, but you go back and you watch them now, and they're just more annoying than anything else, right? Like watch The Net again, and it's
I
impossible
love
to
the
get
net.
through.
I love the net.
It's
Shut up.
but it's impossible to like her in that movie. I'm sorry, it's impossible to like anybody in that movie as far as I'm concerned. Or like Speed, right? I love Speed, but man, Speed and Speed 2, she's just the worst character in those movies. The best character in those movies are always the side characters and the villains,
The
right? Like
villains. The villains are both of those movies.
and Jeff
villains shine.
Daniels. Yes, well,
Yeah,
yes,
Jeff
but
Daniels. He shit his pants in Dumb and Dumber, and then like you cried for him in Speed that same year.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, man. I mean, like, so it's really interesting to think about going back to these America's Sweethearts now, right? Like going back to these ones that were these greats in the 90s and thinking about the fact that like we don't really talk about those movies anymore. It's not like the romantic movies from the 80s where we talk about things like Romancing the Stone and that sort of stuff, right? Like, or was that early 90s? But still, like in
No,
that
Remains
same
of the
like
Stone
era.
is the 80s. It
Yeah,
was part of my
like
365.
and like you go back and you watch those, and I don't know, maybe it's because we're so far removed from them, but I think it's really more of that product of the 90s being just a black hole for culture, like we've talked about before. Just nothing seemed to make it out of the 90s looking good. It just didn't happen, you know?
Yeah, I mean you're not wrong in that estimation at all. Like I think about it, it's like yeah, there are no movies from the '90s that I'm like fond of. Like there are movies that I like, but as your brother pointed out, like I like PCU because it was on literally every afternoon after school.
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
I'd
yeah,
put on,
yeah.
you couldn't put on Comedy Central and not see PCU. So
Yeah.
like it becomes ingrained in the culture, not so much as a movie, but as like a show on TV.
I mean, think about comedies in the 90s. I mean, like, we don't watch Farrelly Brothers movies anymore. We don't watch Jim Carrey movies anymore. We don't do Adam Sandler movies anymore. Like, you know what I mean? Like that kind of stuff didn't survive. And then in the romantic angle, we don't make romantic comedies like we used to because they just don't work for us. We hate those archetypes and tropes that all of those that we fell into in the 90s now because we look back at them and, like you're saying, we realize that some of those characters are just the worst.
Well, it's like Ross and Friends, right? Like you look at Ross and Friends, and he's just like an entitled little person who believes that he deserves Rachel.
I firmly believe and intend to one day dedicate an entire podcast to how terrible Ross is. But only further emulated in the likes of like Ted Mosby years later.
Yeah, it's
But it firmly like it all traces back to that exact thing that you're talking about, though. Like you watch the stuff that happens, and Ross is just terrible to everybody around him in that show, right? And like at the time, that was the joke, but now it's not funny all the time. Now we go back and we watch, and we're just like, man, he's just horrible, and part of that might be the idea of binge watching, the idea of these feelings that we have about Julia Roberts, characters in these movies in the 90s. Like, was there ever going to be, did they ever imagine that there would be a time where we would have like access to 90 of her movies at our fingertips that we could watch at any moment? Like, or like, were they selling us on the idea that like, you like Julia Roberts, remember? And then we showed up and we were like, oh, do we like Julia Roberts? And then the next time around, they were like, you like Julia Roberts, right? And we hadn't seen Julia Roberts in a while. So we were like, sure, I think I do. And then you go back and you're like, oh, do I like Julia Roberts? You know what I mean? Like, was it just that it was so spaced out that we could tolerate it more?
that's an interesting way of looking at it. Is it fatigue? Is it Julia Roberts fatigue? And that's
Yeah.
exactly why I think I need to rewatch My Best Friend's Wedding. But I can't change it. Like I would never have used that word, that strong word, to describe that actress or any of the characters that she played. Until I saw that movie, because it's just like, no, this is not the way that you do it.
Yeah.
And I think another reason why we don't like things like that, like the reason why Ross, we notice it, is that we also see people in the modern world who like clearly were affected by that character and have modeled the way that they approach the world like that. So it becomes toxic twice.
Well, and then on top of that, we've also become much more savvy about the people that kind of character is affecting, right? Like at the time, like Ross filtering through 7 different girlfriends in a season and like seeing the way that he treats them is funny, until we now live in a world in which we are faced with those 7 different girlfriends having a voice to speak out against him in a way that they didn't in the 90s, right? As they rightly should. I'm not saying in any way that like they should have that ability to then, but that does definitely affect the way that we can tolerate a character like that when we are constantly being bombarded then with the other side of the story that like we weren't in those times, right? Like we can't see a character like Ross getting away with the shit that he gets away with anymore because it just wouldn't be tolerated nowadays. And like I said, and it shouldn't have been in the first place. It's just, it was all for laughs and everybody was rich, so what did we care?
True.
I mean, like the 90s, boom. Like
The
everybody had
90s,
some money, so
in
nobody
a
cared.
nutshell.
Yeah, man. I mean,
Back to America's Sweethearts. Not that we've got a little derailed, but because of this film, you talk about how John Cusack's Eddie character doesn't really do anything to like alienate you that much.
let me put a shine on that if that's what it
That's
came
fine.
across.
No. I'm condensing, but
Yeah, no, he definitely does things to alienate you, but what we learn is that he's a much more complex character than just his alienation, right? Which is so rare for a movie of that time, that like to have a character that is as kind of skeevy in moments as his character is, but then at the same time trying so hard not to be, that like you can't help but root for him. I'm thinking like Bradley Cooper basically in anything, but Bradley Cooper in Silver Linings Playbook, right?
Never
Like
seen
there are
it,
terrible
which is
things that he does in
crazy.
them. There are terrible things that he does in that movie, not on any like dramatic level, but not on any crazy dramatic level, other than like the way that he basically is falling apart, and it's about him trying to like fix himself, right? So we root for him because we see that he's falling apart, we see that he's not great, right? And we live in an era nowadays where like anti-heroes are like the thing, right? So in a lot of ways, John Cusack is just kind of like the original kind of anti-hero for these romantic comedies, and again, something that you just didn't see very often back then. So what comes across as complex then and like deep nowadays comes across as a little tropey because it's something that we have seen a thousand times. But again, it's hard to not fall in love with him because it's also John Cusack. Like at the end of the day, the dude's just good at making you fall for him.
Right, but that's the thing that I wanted to expound upon, and why I was trying to find an unrated version of this film is there is a thing that happens in the original cut of the movie and the international release that would undo all of that.
Really?
And that is, we're introduced in the very last scene of the movie before like the coda to Christopher Walken's character's daughter. Like she says, if I could just defend my father, and they say no, and then she says, well, then I'd like to defend Hector because I've slept with him and it's definitely bigger than a roll of quarters.
Right, yes.
She is like a non-character in that movie. But if
Hmm.
you watch it, she is there a lot. Like she is there in a bunch of scenes, that actress. And
Right.
the reason is that Eddie had a revenge affair against Catherine Zeta-Jones, Gwen, with her
Hmm.
in the original film, and it
How old is she
exists
supposed to
in the
be?
international. She's in her 20s.
Okay.
Like, yeah, so it's
Okay.
not, there's nothing dirty about it. It's just the fact that like that completely changes the entire arc of this film. Like in an international release, he goes off. He believes that she's sleeping with Hector. So in an attempt to get revenge, he sleeps with the director's daughter. And
Yeah,
then
yeah,
like,
yeah.
so you have that whole thing. And then like the way that they were going to like make that okay is that she's a big whore because she also
Yes.
slept with Hector.
Yeah, the
It is
reveal is that she sleeps with everybody. So
So it's
really,
like
it's
it's
okay that
okay
Eddie
that
slept
John
with her.
Cusack slept with her.
Yeah.
You can still be
Yeah.
happy that he winds up with Julia Roberts' Kiki
Well,
character.
it's interesting to me that they made the call to leave it in the European release. Like I in a weird way, I get why they would think that would be okay. I mean, like the idea of extramarital affairs and sexuality in general being handled much differently outside of our country, like is definitely a key factor in that decision, I bet. But at the end of the day, it still says something about his character, right? Like I can't imagine that makes him look better in other countries, right? Like it still makes him look pretty
You know what though?
pretty
What it
at the
might
very
do,
least petty, right?
but what it might do is explain why they separated. Because like
Hmm.
what you just said is that like extramarital affairs happen, right? Like it's a very prudish American ideal that like once you're married, that's it.
Right, right.
And we're evolving past that a little bit, but like it is very like monogamy is super important in America.
At least in our film still, right? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like the world is evolving, but it's still it's ridiculous. So if you have it that she's seeing somebody and then he is also seeing somebody, maybe it's like, then why do they got to be married, right? Like why does their relationship matter? And maybe it's more tied to the fact that he was so it's not even that they're in a relationship. It's just that like he had developed feelings for this fictional relationship that he was a part of to market these movies. And then
Yeah.
once he has this extramarital affair, he realizes like, well, why do I care about her? Like it's not worth caring about this woman who doesn't actually care for me.
Mm.
Like
Yeah,
it just might be the way to like
yeah,
drive the story forward for a different market where like her sleeping with
yeah,
Hector, like, and
yeah. Yeah. And again, also time, right? Like the way that that story would have played 20 years ago is very different than the way that that story would play now. The two of them sleeping with two other people and separating would be a very
adult
non-issue
decision.
nowadays.
Like,
Right, exactly. Yeah. It's just a product of its time, man. And like, there's a lot of other things that we're not going to get to touch on today because we're already like approaching an hour talking about this movie. But like, Alan Arkin's character is like a weird like like discovery from the past. Like, I don't know the last time that I've seen like a mystic cult leader portrayed as like a first of all a joke and then like a sellout all within like 10-15 minutes. It's just completely
that's another scene that's cut out from the American release and in the international version is Alan Arkin when he's like John Cusack's like, do I go to dinner with her or not? He contacts him and you see him tooling around in the convertible in Las Vegas. So like it further sells out this guru idea.
yeah. But I mean, like, we see it pretty well sold out in that
Oh
scene.
yeah,
The
no,
moment Billy
it's
Crystal offers him a car, he sells out John Cusack real quick.
but like they also do a really nice job to balance it out where he's like, yeah, it's supposed to cure you in 2.5 weeks. And he's like, oh, how long have you been here? 6 months.
Yeah.
Like it's like
Yeah.
there's a thing as like you're hiding here, not so much getting help here.
Yeah, part of me, and part of this is because of how much Wild Wild Country I've been watching lately, but part of me was also wondering if they were keeping him there for his money.
Yeah, right.
Like part of it is also like, oh, you're going to come in for 2.5 weeks, and then they just kind of trap him there for a bit and convince him he's not getting better so that he keeps spending his money. But again, none of that is actually said in the movie. That's all me just nowadays applying 2018 context
But
to it, right?
it also can't be that because a car is more valuable than him
And
doesn't
that's true.
exist in any world.
Yeah,
And
that's true.
Alan Arkin's character, first of all, lovely callback to his character from Grosse Point Blank. As being John
Yes.
Cusack's therapist, but also the fact that he is exasperated with this guy. Like even if they were keeping him there for his money, like
No, he's
it's
done with
not
it, right.
worth it anymore.
Right.
Like because you're not just taking my advice and going away. Like you want more. Bim salabim.
Yeah, and then he just says a bunch of gibberish nonsense
What
that's
does that
super
mean?
offensive, and then
I
like,
don't know.
oh man, yeah, like all sorts of weird little like things that pop up in this movie. I mean, even I made a joke about it earlier, but even the weird stuff with like the dog licking Billy Crystal's balls, like that being like a running joke throughout the movie, is like super weird now.
Weird callback too. Like weird
Yeah.
that would get called back as the final joke of the movie.
Yeah, exactly. Why is that the joke we go out on in this film? Oh my God, there's so many other things that could have happened. The entire joke with John Cusack and the cactus, I think in light of things like the hashtag Me Too movement and like and the idea of sexual harassment of actresses, I think would be a much different storyline nowadays.
Well, we also talk about the fact that he doesn't look like he's playing with himself at all.
Well, no, exactly. It's also a huge leap to go from he fell in that cactus to he must be whacking it. Like
Also, cactuses. This is like here's a Devon Decker pro tip for life. Cactuses are not as big a deal as media makes them out to be. And like you look at where those barbs are, none of those barbs went into flesh. Those are all stuck in his
hung like
pants.
a friggin' horse.
No, they're like above where it would be if he was hung like crazy. Like he'd need girth. He'd like need insane girth for that to like be touching any of him. And like, and if they were embedded deep into his skin, which like they show that shot of his crotch, and it's like those are all in your pants. I don't know what the problem is. It would take a lot more force to remove them than just like plick plick plick. Those are sound effects I just made. Plick plick plick.
Oh God.
Okay, so I guess if we're gonna wrap up on this, here's things that make this movie harder to handle.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really the issue is that like if they were going for this beautiful like meta look at like the seediness of Hollywood, they don't ground it in reality enough because Gwen and Eddie have done 9 movies together. Time Over Time is going to be their 10th. 6 of them grossed over $100 million. So I looked at what, like, first of all, America's Sweethearts made nowhere near $100 million. Just like as a chalk. I think it made 93, which is impressive, but that's also Lifetime. That's its lifetime gross is $93 million.
Yeah, not its like run, right?
Not like its original run. But then I looked at like Sleepless in Seattle and You've Got Mail, because like that really feels like the closest analog to what they got.
Of course, right.
And that is, and you look at those, 112 million and like 115 million. Lifetime gross.
They made those like 10 years apart.
Yeah.
Yeah.
8 years, I think.
8 years,
total.
but it took them some time. They weren't pumping them out 2 a year, right? Like,
Yeah,
it's not like Marvel movies where they were just like, let's get these two on screen.
There is no way.
Yeah.
Oh, Keanu Reeves, Sandra Bullock. There's another pairing that we didn't mention. I went right to Keanu Reeves, Winona Ryder, because they have a new movie coming out. Sorry. But like, there's no way that fatigue would not set in to the fact that like, oh my God, a 10th Gwen and Eddie movie that like, and I don't know, maybe I'm looking at it from like now, but I'm also thinking of like back then. And there were people who were like, I don't want to see Richard Gere and Julia Roberts together in Runaway Bride. Yeah. Like,
yeah.
Like, yeah, you're not wrong.
I mean, like it is also
from.
part of the suspension of disbelief for the movie is that they are such a powerful couple that people care so much about them being together that it's going to make or break this movie. All right, like that is like that's just a conceit of the world in some ways for me, though. You know, like you're totally right. Like it's insane, this world that they live in, and so if it is going to be a critique of Hollywood, it falls flat on its face the second it's not real Hollywood for sure. Well, I think some of the stuff that's really funny to me are like the really absurd ways that they try and show that Christopher Walken is quirky, right? the entire Unabomber joke is like, first of all,
Tim
jokes
Kaczynski
about the Unabomber
at Fox. No, the Unabomber.
Oh God,
he had that little shack brought over to his estate.
Yeah,
that's where he edits.
Oh God. It's such a weird joke that he like, and I also think that they screw themselves. Maybe in retrospect they wouldn't do this, but the fact that they reveal Christopher Walken in that scene is ridiculous to me. They totally should have held off on him until the end, right? Have his voice over the phone or something, and have it be like muddled in a way that we don't quite hear it, and then reveal that it's Christopher Walken at the end of that movie. That would have blown everybody's fucking mind.
Yes.
But yeah. There's all sorts of little weird things.
Let's also talk about the fact that like his character is Hal Ashby is the inspiration for his character.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And Hal Ashby won 2 Oscars and he was nominated for a 3rd. The 2 Oscars that he won were for film editing. And then the one that he was nominated didn't win was for directing. So like there's also this weird thing where they're like, he won 3 Oscars. And it's like, that's insane. That's insane in 2001 to say that we're working with a director who won 3 Oscars. Because the last person who won 3 Oscars, well, you have John Ford, who was nominated 5 times, won 4. John Ford has been dead for like 50 years. And then you have
and Hollywood's gotten much bigger since his time.
Like, and you look at this stuff and it's like, even Spielberg has only 2 Oscar wins.
Right.
So it's like this weird, like they say that and I'm like, that means nothing to me. Because like, we don't know what the Oscars are for. What does that mean as like how a filmmaker is?
Yeah, like, best original score. Yeah, let's give him a movie to direct then.
Yeah, like he could have just won him for film editing, right? Especially if Hal Ashby is the inspiration for that guy. Like, why do they want to make a Hal Weidman picture? I don't know. He's really good at editing movies. We've never seen him direct before.
So let's give him an absurd amount of money, especially for this time of
$89 million is the budget on Time Over Time. $89 million. And I'm like, it's a romantic comedy in 2001. No, even with the science fiction-y stuff, that you see like the 2 brief scenes of the movie, and it looks like less than sci-fi.
Yeah. My mother says it's the best thing I've ever made. Oh, God.
I can also do these in blue.
Yeah, and like lest we forget that Stanley Tucci's in this movie,
Oh,
please.
he's
Like,
so
come on,
good.
every
Stan-
time he just pops
dude,
up and does
dude,
this. Yeah.
Stanley Tucci in this movie has what might be my favorite moment, and that is where he's like, "I'm loving what you're doing," and he's like, "Yeah, maybe I get him to commit suicide." Yeah, yeah. Do you think you can get him to do it at the premiere? I'm joking. You're not joking, Stanley Tucci.
Yeah. Oh God, yeah. I mean, I think that one of the things that saves this movie, though, despite like all of this crap, right, that we're throwing at it, the reason that it still works for me is everybody in this movie fucking commits. There's not a single person who is phoning it in for this film, and that's all the way down to Larry King, right? Like everybody that's in this picture is just like they're in it, like they get the joke and they want to make it happen. You know, it might not play anymore, but they sure as hell wanted to make it play, right? And so it's just it's watching a bunch of people at the top of their game doing mediocre work that is totally okay with me. You know what I mean? Like from the get go, it was gonna be mediocre, but damn, did they give it their all? You know?
Which is so like those are like sad things about this movie, like because Billy Crystal wrote it, and Billy
Mm,
Crystal is a great creator of comedy and all that. So like when you say that it's mediocre, like it kind of makes sense why it took so long for it to get made.
yeah,
Like because he wrote this after When Harry Met Sally. Like his time on
hmm
that movie inspired him to do that film because of the reaction that people had to them in that film and all that. Like his initial idea was him and Meg Ryan in this picture as Gwen and Eddie.
yeah.
And it's
That
like,
would and that would and you know maybe that would have been even better. You know, maybe it's not that it was made too early. Maybe it was made too late.
I agree. I 100% agree because if you're like looking at it from that thing, and then like, because here's the other thing: Catherine Zeta-Jones and John Cusack at this point had appeared in one movie together.
Mm,
They didn't have like that meta view that you have when you get Richard Gere and Julia Roberts back together, or Tom Hanks and Meg Ryan together. They
sure.
were together in High Fidelity for like 3 scenes because she plays Charlie.
Right, right, right.
And it's like, and so most of them are in the past. Like there's one scene in the present, and that's like the shortest scene that those two share. So you don't have any like nostalgia for when these two acted together. A,
Right.
because most people hadn't seen High Fidelity. Sorry. But B, because like the stuff they do in High Fidelity doesn't really like speak or latch on.
Yeah, it doesn't stick with you in any way, right? You're right. They went with two people that, for all intents and purposes, were not America's sweethearts at any point. You know, I mean, like maybe John Cusack in the early '90s, maybe I don't know. Like was there ever a point where he maybe fell into that? And Catherine Zeta-Jones, I mean, like you have what was the one she did there with the lasers?
With the
What's his
laser.
nuts? You know, Sean Connery there in her.
Oh, Entrapment.
Entrapment. Yeah. That was like, I mean, like when I was younger, that was the one that everybody talked about with her, right? And so it's not a romantic comedy. It's like that's not where her background comes from, you know.
In
Unlike
fact,
somebody like a Julia Roberts, that
her showing up in this film. Well, I really love that Julia Roberts was initially cast to play Gwen, and then she's like, no, I'd much rather play the Kiki character. Like
I
that's great trivia.
I get that she would want that, but you have to see the merit in her play. Like I can't believe she did that to herself because honestly, I think if anybody was going to make me like Gwen, it was going to have to be somebody like Julia Roberts. Because that's the other problem that I have with this movie is that at the end of the day, Catherine Zeta-Jones does not ever sell me once on being okay with Gwen as a character, which I think we talked about earlier. But like, imagine somebody like Julia Roberts in that role, and you do kind of fall in love with her, you know. Not that I can't fall in love with Catherine Zeta-Jones at any point. Like, there's definitely movies that she does that I think she's perfect in, and I think that this role, she's just mean.
Right, like she is. This right here is her performance in this film could single handedly have set back the feminist movement 10, 20 years.
Yeah,
Because
yeah,
like she's so obsessed with her career and what people think of her that it's like this is like you have those idiots and those assholes who could point to her character in this film and be like, this is the problem with women having equal rights to men.
yeah.
Is that
No,
they will abuse it and they will take advantage.
there's definitely
I'm
moments
Alex
in this movie
Jones
where she is a caricature of a
of a
very
human
stereotypical
being.
figure that is just it's a very problematic figure that you're right is could very easily be used as ammunition if this movie had been more successful. Yeah, she's not great. Not great, man.
Yeah,
Um,
and that's disappointing in a lot
mhm.
of ways because there is no balance. Like one of the things that like I like about John Cusack having that revenge affair is that like it sort of puts him on the same level. Like he's never on that same level. Even his attempted murder, which we didn't mention until minute 64 of this podcast. But
Yeah,
his attempted murder of her is played off as a joke and an
yeah.
accident.
Yeah, well, like I said, there's some stuff that he does that, upon reflection, again with like the hashtag Me Too movement being out there, and common fucking sense, we realize that he's not that great of a character either, right? Like I think that's another thing about this movie where it starts to suffer nowadays is, and again, this maybe speaks to some of the Julia Roberts stuff that we were talking about, is we've aged past a point where we can be okay with their antics, right? Like that just doesn't work anymore. But I do think that still, at the end of the day, this movie still deserves to keep getting brought up every few years because I don't know of another movie that did this kind of work, like where it really kind of took Hollywood to task as opposed to really propping it up. Because we always see those movies that make Hollywood look so good, and everybody loves a movie about movies being made. And so like them taking this, Billy Crystal taking that concept and really kind of going his cynical route with it is not something you see very often. And so like I still have to go back to it.
I guess the last thing that I want to say on this film, I do like this movie. Like I said like, well, I guess I'm gonna watch that again, but mostly because like, yeah, I guess I gotta watch that again, right? Because I need to have a real view of what it is.
Mm-hmm.
But watching it again, the thing that really struck me is it felt like the unofficial third movie in the Savage Steve Holland trilogy
Oh God. Oh man.
of
All right.
Better Off Dead, One Crazy Summer, and then this.
Mm-hmm.
And like to the point where I'm like, Savage Steve Holland didn't direct this film, right? That'd be fucking crazy. And he didn't write it, but like there's just those moments where like Lane in Better Off Dead and Hoops in One Crazy Summer has these they're like cutaways. Like I don't even know how to do
Hallucinations.
they're hallucinations of like murdering somebody.
Yeah.
And those happen,
Yeah.
and it's just like, yeah, this really feels like he's channeling those two characters.
Yeah, no, he definitely is. The only thing he's missing is claymation cacti coming to life and pricking his dick. Like that's honestly
That's
the
true.
one
There's
thing.
no claymation in this movie.
Right. That's the way you tell it's not. Unfortunately, after everything, is you're like, oh, it's not one of those movies because there's no animation laid over any of this.
But like, what
Except for Seth Green, his entire thing was done Robot Chicken style, just an action figure that they moved one step at a time.
But like, imagine if it had been Demi Moore. Like that would have really meant
Yeah.
something. And their
Yeah.
relationship is almost non-existent in One Crazy Summer.
Mhm.
But like, it would have
Yeah.
at least been playing on that. Like that's the biggest misstep of this film, is that you have America's Sweethearts, but you don't have America's Sweetheart in Julia Roberts, but you
Buried
don't have
buried in
Buried in a
second
fat suit.
female lead. Yeah, and a fat suit at some point, which is just great.
Yeah.
Oh man.
I don't know. It's a good one though. I agree with Sejohn. Check it out. Let's check. This is a movie that you should check into every 10 years. And I look forward to 2028, where even if the Say Report isn't a thing anymore, I hope it is though. I really hope it is.
We will do our decade watch of.
Sejohn and I we're gonna like rent out a theater. We're gonna start saving now for 2028, where we sit down and watch it. Or you know what, we should like realistically, we should start saving now for 2021 and the 20th anniversary of America's Sweethearts.
There you go.
Yeah,
man.
That's not that far off. That's 3 years. That's 3 years from today because it came out in July. So yeah.
Oh my God, that's super weird.
So
Yeah,
let's
this movie's
do
gonna
it.
be 20 years old. Jesus.
This movie's gonna be 20
All
years
right.
old in 3 years. So from when we recorded this, because again, it's a time capsule episode. So if you want to yell at me about anything I had to say in this episode about this movie, first off, remind me that this is what it's about, because I'm going to have to probably watch the movie again in order to retaliate, and then tweet me at Devon D. Decker.
And if you want to try and find Devon and I in this movie somewhere and tweet us about it, you can get me at Siege versus the World.
All right, so until then, let's send it to our very own Hank Azaria, Will.
Thank you for listening to the Say Report with your host Devon Decker and Sejohn Selwick. Please follow the guys on Twitter and Facebook by searching for The Say Report, and you can always subscribe on your podcast channel so this is delivered straight to you and you can enjoy it every week. With apologies to your mother, we'll see you next time.